Once upon a time. Welcome, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. My name is Artemis, and I like to read and knit and craft and game. But today I wanted to show you one of the books in my collection of antique and vintage books. And it's one of my favorites because it has all these beautiful illustrations and it's about science. But before we get into that, let's get ready to relax. Settle into your seat. And then we're going to take a big breath in. And out. Good. And now to really get the serotonin flowing, let's try a little bit of gratitude. Try to think of something that you're grateful for that happened recently. For me, my friend dropped off some cookie dough, and so I got to have fresh baked cookies with basically no work, and it was wonderful. If you'd like, you can tell me what you're grateful for down in the comments. And now I think we're ready to get started. Today we're looking at marvels of heat, light, and sound, profusely illustrated from the Scientific Recreation series. I know you can't really see that word there because of the water damage on this book, but the spine is intact. Scientific Recreation series, illustrated. This book was published around 1890, so it's around 130 years old. And I think that's so incredible that I get to touch something that is 130 years old. I love the sound of old books, the smell. Marvels of heat, light, and sound being a popular account of heat in its various manifestations: the thermometer, specific and latent heat, the eye and optical illusions, the telescope and microscope, the ear and hearing, the phonograph and micrography, Singing Flames, etc., by Gaston de Sandier and Henry Firth, with many illustrations. Now, I had to look through this book ahead of time, and I think the chapter with the best illustrations. Goodness, where's the table of contents here? The chapter with the best illustrations is Optical Illusions Continued, Chapter 6. So we're going to skip right on ahead to the best part. This is a fun bookmark that somebody made for me. Drink tea and read books. Very important. Chapter 6. Optical Illusions Continued. Experiments. The Talking Head. Ghost Illusions. The enumeration of optical illusions is so considerable that we have no intention of describing them all, and we merely cite a few other examples. The following facts have been communicated to us by M. Nache. When examining algae under the microscope, we notice the spaces which separate the streaks ornamenting the siliceous covering of these curious organisms, and it is explained that they are formed by hexagons, visible only when we examine the object with a powerful microscope. For a long time, says M. Nache, I suspect that's Monsieur Nache, I occupied myself with the examination of the hexagonal appearance of the points constituting the streaks. Why should these hexagons show themselves, and how could they be other than the visible base, small pyramids piled very closely one on the other? And if this were the case, why were not the points of the little pyramids visible? Or was the structure before me analogous to that of the eyes of insects? Then the carapace would be but a surface of perforated polygonal openings. This latter hypothesis was attractive enough, and would have explained many things, but some careful observations with very powerful object glasses, quite free from blemishes, had shown me that these hexagons had round points, contrary to the description of micrographs. These observations, corroborated by the micrographic photographs of Lagerbauer, the much regretted designer, and by Colonels Woodward and Washington, left not the slightest doubt that it was necessary to discover why the eye persistently saw hexagons where there were circles. To elucidate this point, it was necessary to find some means of reproducing artificially what nature has accomplished with so much precision on the surfaces of algae. After many fruitless attempts, I decided on making a trial of a stereotype plate covered with dots arranged in quincunxes very close together. This is a diagram of hexagonal appearance formed by circles joining together. The smaller one is another figure of the same kind. Very descriptive. I think this is meant to illustrate that when many circles are bunched together like this, they appear to be hexagons. I think that's what it's getting at. The result was more successful than I had hoped. The effect produced is exactly that of the arrangement of the so-called hexagons of the most beautiful of the algae, the Pleurosigma angulata. If these stereotypes are examined with one eye only, we shall be immediately convinced that we have to do with hexagonal polygons. It is useless to give any long exposition of a figure so clearly explanatory. It is simply an effect of the contrast and opposition of the black and white in the sensation of the retina. This effect is particularly striking with the figure below, a negative photograph heliographically engraved according to the previous one. In this, the white points seem to destroy the black spaces and to approach each other tangentially, and the irradiation is so intense that the white circles appear much larger than the black of the former one, although of the same diameter. There are in these facts many points which may interest not only students of micrography, but also artists. As to the algae, the origin of this investigation, it remains to be discovered if these circles, which cover their siliceous carapace, are the projection of small hemispheres, or the secretion of openings made in the thick covering. Certain experiments, however, seem to prove that they are hemispheres, and the theory is also confirmed by a microscopic photograph from Lager-Bauer's collection, magnified 3,000 diameters, in which a black central point is seen in the center of each circle, a certain reflection of the luminous source reproduced in the focus of each of the small demispheres, which constitute the ornament of the algae. The microscope, which has progressively shown first the streaks, then the hexagons, and then the round points, will surely clear up the point some day or other. Mr. Sylvanus P. Thompson, professor of physics at University College, Bristol, has recently presented the French Society of Physical Science with a curious example of optical illusion, the true cause of which is not clearly known, but which we may compare with other facts made known some time ago, of which no precise explanation has been given. Let us first consider in what the effect discovered by Mr. S. P. Thompson consists, according to the description that has been given of it by M. C. M. Gariel. The illustrations here given will also allow of our verifying the truth of the statements. This is Mr. Thompson's optical illusion. Give a circular movement to these figures, and the circles will appear to turn around. Circular movement, does that mean? I'm not sure if I see it. Perhaps I'm doing it wrong. The first illustration consists of a series of concentric circles of about the width of 1 millimeter, separated by white intervals of the same size. These dimensions are not absolute. They may vary with the distance, and may even be a few inches in width if it is desired to show the phenomenon to a rather numerous auditory. If we hold the design in the hand and give it a twirl by a little movement of the wrist, the circle appears to turn round its center, and the rotation is in the same direction and is equally swift. That is to say, the circle appears to accomplish a complete turn, whilst the cardboard really accomplishes one in the same direction. For the second effect, we draw a dark circle, in the interior of which are placed a number of indentations at regular intervals. Operating in the same manner as described above, this notched wheel appears to turn round its center, but this time in a different direction from the real movement. In this, however, as in the other design, the effect is more satisfactory if we do not look directly at it. The movements also are particularly striking in combinations such as that represented on page 94, it's this diagram over here, in which the multiplicity of circles does not allow us to fix one specially. We may add that the same effects may be obtained with eccentric wheels, or even with other curves than circles. By means of a photograph on glass, Mr. Thompson has been able to reflect these designs on a screen where they were obtained on a large scale. a circular movement was communicated to the photographic plate so that the design moved in a circular manner on the screen, and in this case also there existed the illusion that every circle seemed turning round its center. And what is the explanation of these curious effects? Mr. Thompson does not believe, and we share his opinion, that the faculty possessed by the retina of preserving images during a certain time, persistence of impressions on the retina, can entirely explain these phenomena. Without desiring to formulate a decided theory, Mr. Thompson is of opinion that we may class these facts with others which have been known for some time, and that perhaps it is necessary to attribute to the eye some new faculty which may explain the whole at once. Brewster and Adams have described phenomena which are equally curious, the principle of which we will describe, adding also some analogous investigations due to Mr. Thompson. The result seems to be that there exists in the eye a badly defined purpose of nature which in a certain way compensates Brewster for the real phenomenon, because it has a contrary effect, which will continue for some time after the cessation of the phenomena, and which gives by itself a sensation contrary to that which the real movement would have produced. Thus, after having fixed our eyes for 2 or 3 minutes on a rushing waterfall, if we suddenly turn our glance on the adjacent rocks, the latter appear to move from top to bottom. It is not a question here of the effect of the relative movement to be observed on regarding simultaneously the falling water and the rocks. If one can succeed in abstracting oneself to such an extent that the water appears motionless, the rocks appear to take a contrary movement. In the phenomenon we describe, there is no simultaneous comparison. The eyes are turned successively first on the water and then on the rocks. In a rapid river, such as the Rhine above the fall at Schaffhausen, the stream is not equally swift in every part, and the current is noticeably more rapid in the middle of the river than near the banks. If we look fixedly at the center of the stream, and then suddenly turn our eyes towards the banks, it will appear as though the river were flowing back towards its source. This kind of compensation does not only produce an apparent displacement, but also changes in size. When traveling at great speed in a railway train, the objects of the surrounding country, as one flies by them, gradually appear smaller and smaller. If, when this occurs, we suddenly remove our eyes to the interior of the railway carriage and fix them on immovable objects such as the sides of the compartment or the faces of our traveling companions, the images on the retina will really preserve the same size, and yet the objects will appear larger. Such are some of the interesting facts among those discovered by Mr. Thompson. And though we do not intend to push the inquiry further, we think it may not be without interest to describe here another illusion of that organ whose properties are in every way so curious and remarkable. Another experiment to show the existence of impressions received by the retina can be made with the figure on page 96. It's this one here. Experiment on complementary colors. If the gaze be fixed upon the dark spot in the center of the white figure for about half a minute, and the eyes then directed to the ceiling or a sheet of white paper, the white figure will be reproduced in black. This result is based upon the principle of complementary colors. A red design, for instance, will be reproduced in green. There is a dark spot in every human eye, that is, a spot which is insensible to light. The eye is generally regarded as a perfect instrument, but it is not yet so by any means. One of our great philosophers remarked that if an instrument were sent home to him so full of errors, he would feel justified in returning it to the optician. But the eye has its dark place, the punctum, cacum, my goodness, cacum. But the eye has its dark place, the punctum cacum. I don't know. And it can be discovered by covering the left eye with the hand and holding the present page at arm's length with the other. I think they're referring to this diagram on the previous page, which is in fact not the present page. They're saying, what are they saying? Then fix the gaze on the small cross in the picture and bring the book close up. At a little distance, the white ball will disappear from the page. Ah, yes. So they're saying if you look up close at this X and then move the page away from your face, eventually this circle will disappear. This is a very fun experiment to do, actually. You do have a blind spot in your eye. Everyone does. The illustration shows us a very curious optical illusion, and one very easy to practice. Roll up a sheet of paper and look through it as though a telescope, with the right eye, keeping both eyes open. Then place the left hand, open palm, towards you against the roll of paper. You will then appear to be looking through a hole in your left hand. Sometimes the effect is produced without holding up the other hand to the roll, as shown on page 98. An optical illusion, how very clear. I'm not quite sure what they're getting at with this picture. It seems to be he's looking through a hole in his hand, and he's looking through a tube. I'm very unclear on this diagram. I think textbooks have improved their diagrams in modern iterations. Let's take a look at this illustration. What is this? A divided telescope. I imagine we're about to learn about this. Seems to be two gentlemen looking through telescopes at a loaf of bread. Oh no, he's looking through a telescope at a solid object. And then there's another telescope, and this gentleman is holding up a rose, I think. I love the idea of gentlemen in suits doing science. Can you imagine wearing a full three-piece suit and doing science? It's just such a classy image. I love it. Among optical illusions, there are a great number that may be produced by means of mirrors. The divided telescope is an example. The apparatus, raised on a firm stand, allows of one apparently seeing an object through a stone or other opaque object, as shown in the cut above. Ah yes, the gentleman was apparently seeing a rose through I still think it looks like a loaf of bread, but I suppose it's supposed to be a rock or something. The illustration shows the arrangement of the apparatus. The observer, looking through it, plainly perceives the object through the glass. The image is reflected 4 times before reaching his eye by means of small mirrors concealed in the instrument. Convex or concave mirrors distort images in a singular manner and produce very interesting effects. Anamorphoses constitute particular objects belonging specifically to the class of experiments relating to cylindrical mirrors. They are images made according to determined rules, but so distorted that when regarding them fixedly, we can only distinguish confused strokes. When they are seen reflected in the curved mirrors, they present, on the contrary, a perfectly regular appearance. The illustration exhibits an anamorphosis made by a cylindrical mirror. It will be seen that the confused image of the horizontal paper is reflected in the cylindrical mirror, producing the figure of a juggler. Yes, there seems to be a reflective metal cylinder here, and this strange distorted image down here, but when it's reflected, you can tell what it is. Cylindrical mirror and anamorphosis. It is easy to contrive similar designs oneself, and conical mirrors may also be employed, which produce particular effects of a no less intriguing kind. The next illustration is of a set of figures which, in a cylindrical mirror, look like the 10 of hearts. Anamorphosis design for the 10 of hearts. Oh, yes, I can see that. It's sort of a weird perspective drawing, like you're looking down a very tall 10 of hearts, I think. But presumably if you had a small cylindrical mirror right here, you'd see the reflection of a 10 of hearts card in the mirror. One of the most remarkable applications of mirrors in amusing experiments is undoubtedly that of the severed and talking head. A few years back, this trick obtained considerable success in Paris and a number of other towns. The spectators beheld a small space set apart in which was placed a table on 3 legs. On this table was a human head, placed in cloth on a dish. This head moved its eyes and spoke. It evidently belonged to a man whose body was completely hidden. The spectators thought they saw an empty space beneath the table, but the body of the individual who was really seated there was concealed by 2 glasses placed at an inclination of 45 degrees to the walls on the right and left. The whole was arranged in such a manner that the reflection of the walls coincided with the visible part of the wall at the back of the room. The 3 walls were painted in one color, and a subdued light increased the illusion, the effect of which was remarkable. I have an illustration of it here. So to spectators, it appears that there is a live head sitting on a table. But here and here, are mirrors at 45 degrees to the walls, so that they're exactly reflecting the walls. And of course, if you dim the whole thing, that makes the illusion even more effective. The talking head, it says. I love the idea that this was such a wild, novel thing at one point in time, because now it seems like such an old and tired trick. But 130 years ago, this was the hot new science. It's really fun to remember that, I think. The spectres designed by Robin also attracted considerable public attention within recent times. They were images formed by the medium of transparent glass. Glass panes often produce the phenomenon of spectres. In the evening, when it is dark out of doors, it is easy to prove that the reflection of objects in a lighted room can be reproduced behind the window panes by reason of the darkness outside. If we approach the window pane, we see also the real objects outside, a balcony, tree, etc. These real objects mingle with the reflected image and combine to produce very curious effects. In this way, Mr. Robin has contrived the effects of the theatre. He throws on the stage the reflection of a person dressed as a suave, and he himself, armed with a saber, stabs the spectre through the body. A great number of other singular effects have been obtained in the same manner. Pepper's ghost was managed in this way. Within recent times, images produced in a similar way have been utilized to facilitate the study of drawing. A piece of glass is fixed vertically on a blackboard. A model to copy from is placed on one side of the piece of glass and is arranged so that the visual ray passes obliquely through the glass, and we perceive the reflection of the design very clearly on the other side. It is then very easily reproduced with a pencil on a sheet of white paper by tracing the outlines. Drawing by reflection, it says. And of course, to illustrate how very easy it is, it's a young girl doing the drawing. Looks like she's drawn, or is copying a drawing of a house with some birds. Looks like, I suppose you can see her hand through the pane of glass, but you can also see the reflection of the drawing you're trying to copy on the pane of glass. That seems like a tracing table is perhaps an easier way of going about things, but it's a neat trick nonetheless. And over here we have a gorgeous illustration of the ghost effect. So this is a stage, and this is underneath the stage, and then the audience is out here. So there's a bright light being shone on the ghost character who's underneath the stage, and that image is being reflected up onto a sheet of glass. It looks like it's about 45 degrees, so the audience can see through the glass to the actors on stage, but they can also see the reflection of the ghost, and so it appears that there's a ghost on stage, which this actor is valiantly stabbing, because obviously you can stab ghosts with a sword, and that definitely totally works. Nonetheless, a neat effect. that's the end of the chapter. Thank you for joining me for this look at marvels of heat, light, and sound. I hope you're all comfy and cozy, ready for sleep. So until next time, good night.